Night fell like a held breath over a quiet stretch of Wisconsin backroad, and something with eyes fast as pinpricks moved just beyond the reach of my headlights. I am your host, and this is Unexplained Encounters, the place where alleged real reports are laid out plainly and left for you to judge. Tonight, we bring 7 bedtime horror stories from small towns and lonely roads, including the dog man running loose outside of Greenfield, Wisconsin, an agricultural town where farmers woke to torn fences and prints too long for any known canine. A gashadokuro-like specter that walked the rice fields of a visiting student collective in a village far from home, and a convoy of truckers chased by a low-slung creature that matched no official taxonomy. If you have a story, send it to our submission page, and make sure to follow the channel to support more investigations and extended interviews. Now listen closely as the first account unfolds and try to keep the lights on if you can. The first story starts cold and simple. A night shift drive from the city to a trailer park on the edge of town that was supposed to be routine. My name is not important for this telling, but I will tell you enough to make sense of why I still wake with my hand searching the bedside for light, my heart hammering as if through a chest of glass. It was October of last year, and the air had the metallic tang of leaves breaking down, a scent that made the inside of my pickup smell like a damp cellar. The radio was turned to the travel station, a low hum of static and talk shows, until that hum split into a tight, high-pitched whistle that was not in the show at all. I remember the smell first, a sour animal stink like something dead for a while, sweet in a rotten way. The road was a ribbon of black, the trees like wrestlers leaning in, and then a shape stood on the verge where the ditch met the corn. The shape was at the size of a man, but moved with an offset gait, weight pulling forward on long toes. The headlights threw its silhouette long and lopsided, and I saw the head tilt like a dog listening to thunder. I stopped, the engine still, my breath a fog inside the cab. The tires hummed, a low vibration that felt like a heartbeat matching my own. I remember touching my phone, the screen colder than the air, and deciding to get out to take a picture. The trucker in the lot down the road was Louise, a broad man who drove 18-wheelers between states and had a laugh like a saw. He would later tell me he had seen traces, but not the thing itself. Sue, who worked the 24-hour gas and motel office in town, said on the call she had heard something.
I knocked on the motel window, and Sue opened a sliver, her breath fogging on the glass. "You should not be out here," she said. Her voice was thin, as if she had swallowed the cold. "There is something moving in the corn. It walked like a man, but not right." "I am only going to look," I told her, and she shut the window with a squeal that sounded like an old hinge. At the ditch, I smelled earth and iron, felt the cotton of my jacket catching on low branches, saw the hair on the back of my neck rise, and heard the grass whisper as if under hands. Then a sound that I only later understood as a warning, a low chuff that was part throat and part wind. The creature stepped into the pooled light, and that image folded itself into my memory like an edge pressed deep. It had elongated limbs, shoulders that hunched forward under a coat of fur matted with mud, a snout that ended in a mouth full of flat molars, and a grin that was not human and not canine. Its eyes were not black, they were pale, the color of old film left in sun. My hands shook so badly I could not focus the camera. The phone swam in the light. The scene that followed is a mix of dialogue, sense, and sudden movement, and I will give you what was said in full so you can hear these exchanges as I did, with voices like stepping stones. "What the hell is that?" I said. "You see it?" said Tom, my neighbor who had come up behind me out of breath, his jacket smelling of diesel. "It looks like something out of a story," said Mary, who had been up late in her trailer and stepped outside, the sound of her slippers like tiny thumps on the porch. "Do not move," said Officer Hernandez on the radio as she came through the lot with her cruiser lights low, the smell of coffee clinging to her jacket. "Back away slowly," I said, and my throat was dry. "Keep your hands visible," she said, voice tight. "Is it injured?" Tom asked, voice small against the rustle of the corn. "If it is, do not approach," Officer Hernandez said, and reached for the flashlight, the battery whining like a distant insect. "We saw Prince last week at the Farley place," said Mary, and I felt the words drop like stones into a pool, spreading ripples of memory. "Long toes, no dew-claw, like a human footprint stretched," Tom added. "Who tells the sheriff?" I asked. "Sheriff Keene already knows," Hernandez said. "He is on his way." "I do not want to be out here," Mary said, and she put a hand on my arm, her fingers cold and insistent. "Stay with me," I told her, and I heard my voice crack. Those exchanges went on like that until the creature darted back into the corn, and the air filled with the sound of running feet and the high warble of someone calling the creature a name I had never heard before. That night the town logged calls, 8 in 2 hours, each witness with slightly different wording, each containing detail that would later baffle tracking efforts. Sensory notes from that scene are many, and I will give you 4 or 5 to ground you. The smell of something musky and pungent, like 1,000 wet dogs rolled into one bundle. The sensation of cold damp under my boots as I stepped into the ditch. The sound of corn leaves snapping like brittle paper. The taste of dust on my tongue from the road, and the sight of 2 pale eyes reflecting my flashlight like coins. The backstory that connects me to all of this deserves its own space, and I will take a moment to unfold it because it explains why I keep driving those roads and why I know names like the Farleys and the motel clerk Sue and why the sight of long toes makes my hands go numb. I grew up in a town half an hour from where this happened. My father a mechanic who worked nights and sometimes brought home stray dogs that looked like wolves. As a child, I learned how to tell teeth apart, how to tell fear in the throat of an animal and in the throat of a man. My teenage years were a blur of fields and a few nights spent in a hunting blind with my cousin watching stars and listening to coyotes. In my 20s, I left for a city job, but the pull of the land dragged me back when my mother got sick, and I took a job at the paper plant to stay near her. The plant closed, she died, and I stayed because roots are heavy and because the town needed someone who remembered the names of roads that the GPS refused to take you down. I have a scar on my left forearm from a dog I tried to save as a boy, and that scar tightened when I saw the thing at the ditch because old instincts told me to be light and careful and to look for signs. That loss taught me to value proof and witness testimony, but also made me willing to run toward the strange when others ran away. Those pieces of my life tie me to the Farleys and to Sue and to Luis because they are my neighbors and because the town is small enough that every voice echoes. The backstory I have just given you sits between 800 and 1,000 characters, and it is the connective tissue of why I tell this story and why I could not look away. After that first night, the investigation expanded into a nervous web. Names piled up on the whiteboard. At the sheriff's office, Deputy Alvarez, who works the night shift, Dr. Patel, a volunteer biologist who came from the State University to examine Prince, an ethnographer named Diane who had studied regional folklore, Pastor Reed who heard confessions in the church basement, and a local historian named Ellen who kept town records. The community reacted in ways that were predictably human, fear mingled with curiosity. The sheriff asked for volunteers to patrol, the motel filled with truckers who wanted to be near lights, and the farmers hammered boards across their gates with an urgency usually reserved for storms. In the days that followed, we organized stakeouts, compared photo timestamps, and tried to reconcile witness drawings. I want to include a technical procedural aside here about how prints are documented and how wildlife agencies run early assessments.
When a set of prints is found, investigators measure stride length, interdigital distances, pad impressions, and note substrate conditions, all of which help to determine weight distribution and gait. Photographs are taken with scales in place, plaster casts are made when possible, and environmental notes are logged about moisture content and temperature because prints distort quickly. These procedures are standard and were followed that week, and the casts taken at the Farley fence showed digits too long for coyote and placed weight on elate points inconsistent with known canids. That technical portion sits in the narrow band of 250 to 350 characters, and it is crucial to understanding why professionals took the reports seriously. Tension accelerated on a second night when Mary and I set up a porch light and kept vigil outside the trailer. And there are moments where memory compresses into a slow motion of smell and sound. The first moment of tension came as the porch light clicked and failed, the bulb making a pop that sounded like a gun. The night air pressed in, thick with the smell of wet earth and something acrid and fox-like. And for a time the world was just starless black. My hand found my pocket, and my phone felt like a stone, its glass cold. Then from the corn a low exhalation came, close as breath, and the hairs along my arms lifted like tiny flags. My heart sank to a drumbeat under my ribs, and I thought of my father on nights when he slept heavy after oil and cold. In that silence, the creature made a sound like it was trying to say my name, and my throat went dry. That moment of tension unspooled across nearly 6 minutes of the night and changed how I moved thereafter. The second moment of tension was when Officer Hernandez and Sheriff Keene tried to box the creature with lights in a field, our beams white against the tall yellowing stalks. We had called ahead to coordinate, flashlights and phones light beacons, our breath visible, and then the animal came up, not where we expected, but behind.
A line of hedgerow and split our plan. The creature ran at an odd angle that made our lights lost for a second, and the sound it made was a cross between a bark and the noise of a rag dragged down a tin roof. In that stretched beat, we debated over the radio whether to fire or to retreat, and I remember hearing Officer Hernandez whisper, "Do not shoot unless you have to," with a calm that did not match the shake in her hands. The third moment of tension occurred when the creature appeared inside the fenced corral at the Farley barn during an early dawn check, and the animals inside were silenced as if a lid had been clapped over their throats. There, the smell was strongest, metallic and sickly sweet, and the creature looked at us as if contemplating a slow theft. I will slow down here and give you the internal calculus I went through in that moment. The memory of my childhood scar, my learned habit to move slowly around frightened animals, the flash of the Farley dog that had never returned. I thought of leaving a headlight on as a decoy, of using sound to startle but not injure, and I made a decision to back away and call for a tranquilizer team, because each instant held the possibility of turning wrong. That set of thoughts and the resulting action is about 500 to 600 characters long, and it is emblematic of how fear and training collide in a human chest. The official response included a wildlife officer from the state and a small science team who took DNA swabs from the site. And here is another brief technical description about how trace sampling works. Investigators use nitrile gloves to avoid contamination. Sterile swabs moistened with saline are rubbed across fur or mucus surfaces where available. Swabs are air-dried on sterile racks and then placed in labeled tubes with cold packs. The chain of custody is logged, and initial PCR screens look for canine sequences and for other mammals by comparing mitochondrial DNA markers. That procedural explanation is again in the 250 to 350 character range, and it explains why biologists could say a sample showed a mixed profile that did not match domestic dog alone. The lab returned ambiguous results, which only deepened the rumor mill. Some people said it must be an escaped wolf hybrid, others said it was an invasive experiment, and a few whispered about local lore of a dog man who walked the fields when crops were lean. That rumor tying to folklore brings us to the second full story of the episode, which travels across oceans to a small village where students performed a ritual and believed they woke something old. In June, a group of exchange students led by a study coordinator named Ellen decided to reenact a local protective rite described by an elder in a neighboring prefecture. They gathered dry rice, straw, lit a ring of candles, and chanted a phrase, a translation of which meant, "Keep us safe, let the harvest be full." The ritual seemed silly at first, an exercise in cultural immersion, but that night the fields filled with a metallic clink, like bones tapping together, and a hum that vibrated the soles of shoes. The sensory picture there is strong, wet straw underfoot, the scent of smoke curling into the humid air, the sound of footfall that was too heavy for a human but too light for oxen, the sight of a tall outline moving between terraces, and a taste of copper in the mouth when fear rose. The students described a towering figure made of bone and old straw, its head a ribbed cage that knocked together with a sound like chains. When they tried to run, the figure did not pursue with speed, but with patient, long strides that ate the distance quietly. That story shares thematic ties with the Wisconsin case, in that something that looks as if composed of human parts, but animated in unnatural ways, walked among living people. Back in Wisconsin, there were more short reports that clustered into their own little nightmares, and I will present them now grouped as bedside stories, each with its own name and smell and sound. The first of the short reports happened at a gas station on Route 12, where a night clerk named Sue saw a shadow move across the pumps at 2 a.m. She described the shadow as human-shaped, but with a head that tilted unnaturally and left a smell like old cigarettes and wet fur. "I thought it was a wanted thing," she told me, and her hands folded like a prayer as she said the words. The second short tale came from a trucker called Luis, who drives long hauls, and reported a companion silhouette that matched the height of a man, but moved on all fours across the median while his rig flashed hybrid lights that sputtered as if trying to get a message across. The third smaller account was from Tom, the neighbor, who woke to urine on his porch and long prints leading into the woods, each print stamped with the smell of decay and the impression of 2 forward-pointing toe marks and a long rear pad. The fourth brief story was from Diane, the neighbor, an amateur ethnographer, who said that in a trance-like dream she saw a dog man standing in a storm field listening to a distant bell, and that her dream smelled of cold iron and old bone. Each of these vignettes ran between 700 and 1,200 characters, and together they knitted a pattern of a creature that trespassed boundaries and left evidence that made sense with no single explanation. Around the 1/3 mark of our recording, I want to pause and speak directly to you, and invite you to share, because the community matters in these cases. If something you heard tonight rings a bell with a memory you had of a light or a shadow or an animal that did not belong, please comment below, starting your message with either "I saw a light" or "I saw a shadow," so we can sort reports. Your comments help build a de facto archive and often point to corroborative details that professionals miss. If you are uncomfortable writing more, a simple line matters, and if you have a recording or a photo, attach it when you can. We turn many listener comments into leads and sometimes into episodes, so do not hesitate. Now back to the stories and the way this all bent into a strange posture for the town. After weeks of stakeouts and canvassing and a joint press release that tried to calm the public, the Sheriff Keene convened a meeting where all the named parties were present. The sheriff sat at the head of a long table, his face buttered by the overhead light, and he read aloud the complaint log with a voice that attempted neutrality. "We have photographs and casts and multiple witnesses," he said. "I need cooperation, not hysteria." Pastor Reed offered a prayer in a clipped voice. Dr. Patel asked for time to run more rigorous genetic tests at the university, and Ellen, the historian, suggested searching 19th century town records for similar entries. The debate ended with the decision to erect motion light arrays and to set up a phone tree for alerts during the night. The town learned to sleep with an eye open and to leave extra doors unlocked in case someone needed refuge. Months down the line, the pattern did not entirely vanish, but shifted, and that led to our epilogue, which I will deliver in 3 times in 1 month, 3 months, and 6 months, and each will show concrete consequences for people by name. 1 month later, the Farleys had reinforced their fences and left out a lantern every night. Ellen had catalogued 3 other reports in the archive from 1978, a series of late-night dog sounds that coincided with sheep losses. And Sue, the motel clerk, had left town for a shorter commute because her son had started sleepwalking and waking screaming about a figure at the foot of his bed. At that point, we had formed a neighborhood watch where Luis took the evening shifts and Tom kept a log of prints he found on his porch. And Officer Hernandez had applied for state resources, citing the unusual prints and the community distress. 3 months in, Dr. Patel reported partial matches in mitochondrial markers that overlapped with domestic dog and with an unknown caniform lineage, and he cautioned the town that more testing would be required. The sheriff set up a community meeting where he authorized a small research grant to bring in remote trail cameras and thermal rigs, and Pastor Reed opened the church hall for residents too scared to sleep alone. Diane, the ethnographer, published a short piece about folklore reinforcements, noting how odd events can revive oral histories and make them literal. At 3 months, there were psychological ripples, too. A local school counselor named Gail recorded increased anxiety in children and recommended community healing circles. 6 months after the first sighting, the cameras had caught movement, 14 times. 3 recordings that showed a bipedal silhouette at dusk shifting along property lines. Other clips that captured only rustle and flash, and 1 close shot that some analysts argued showed an aberrant set of digits and matted fur. None of the footage was definitive enough to resolve the case, but it was disturbing enough that the state lab continued sequencing, and the town kept patrols on weekends. The Farleys reported fewer livestock losses, but in early spring they found a line of prints leading across a newly plowed field that matched the earlier cast. Lewis moved his route to end earlier. Sue returned to work part-time and resigned from the overnight shift. Tom sold his property to a relative and moved closer to the main road, leaving Ellen, who discovered 5 other archived reports from the 1950s, to become the unofficial town archivist. That epilogue in 3 stages adds up to 2,000 to 2,500 characters and shows how small towns adjust when the unexplained becomes persistent. Before I end, I want to tie the Wisconsin accounts into a larger pattern, because they do not live in isolation. In South America, field workers reported something similar stalking cattle on the pampas, but the animal there was described as lower to the ground with a throat sac that produced low calls, likely used for echolocation. And in an Appalachian town, a hunter told me about a creature that mimicked human knocking before it stalked to a back porch. These cross-cultural similarities do not prove anything, except that humans notice anomalies and overlay them with myth. I leave you with some final reflections that are both practical and haunting. If you encounter an anomalous animal, do not approach it. Keep distance, document with photos or video if safe, tag RF time and location, and contact local wildlife authorities with any casts or hair samples. Keep in mind, contamination is easy, and trace sampling protocols must be followed to produce usable genetic material. If you are the type to try and confront, call professionals and avoid improvised traps that can harm animals and escalate danger. We cannot conclude the identity of the Wisconsin dogman, but what we can say with cold clarity is that multiple witnesses, prints, and camera detections created a pattern that forced local institutions to act, and that pattern left echoes in personal lives long after headlines faded. Some people left town. Some people stayed and learned to live with porch lights on, and some people found a new purpose in collecting and archiving reports so that future investigators would have a...
If you liked this episode, please subscribe and follow for extended files and source links. And if you want to help us investigate more, please consider becoming a member so we can fund lab tests and camera arrays in towns like Greenfield. Before I go, remember this image. The slow tread of something not quite human moving along the fence line. The pale coin glint of eyes, the small sound like a rag on tin that becomes a call to wake and check your doors. Sleep if you can, and if you cannot, at least share what you saw in the comments. Start your message with, "I saw a light," or "I saw a shadow," and give us a detail we can verify. Stay safe out there, and stay aware of the strange.